Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MBOM podcast. I'm Amanda and I'll be your host for this and all episodes of the show. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by FavYogis. Do you teach privately? Make payment and registration a breeze. Use the FavYogis app to create and manage classes for your personal clients. Life is just easier with autopay. You can forget about remembering to Venmo, or if you're up in Canada, sending an invoice, an e-transfer, or PayPal, depending on where your clients are in the world. With FavYogis, you can use autopay to enable repeating payments. This will save you so much time and make things so much easier. You can also keep your calendars in sync. Google Calendar integration automatically updates teacher and student classes when you make changes. It's still just your yoga. Teachers add classes, students add teachers and students stay connected. Head on over to the App Store and find FavYogis, FavYogis. Use code MBOM and let them know that I sent you. This episode is also brought to you in part by Ana Luisa. Ana Luisa is a jewelry company, and I know what you must be thinking. What on earth does jewelry have to do with yoga business? I had the same thing when they first connected with me, and then I got to know the brand, I got to know the people, and I got to know the jewelry that they make. And I started thinking about how, as a yoga teacher, I really haven't treated myself to anything nice over the last couple of years. I've been so focused on the hustle of my business, bringing money in, that I haven't even been thinking about self-care in the form of the jewelry that I wear. One of the reasons that I really love Ana Luisa is that they make jewelry that's recycled gold. I don't know if you knew, but it actually takes 20 tons of earth mining to produce a single ring of gold. And with Ana Luisa, they use 100% recycled gold in their products. This is a huge win for me. On top of that, a lot of jewelry that we buy ends up being cheap, breakable, and it's rarely recycled. It's a huge waste for the environment. Ana Luisa's products come from the same jewelers as Tiffany's and Louis Vuitton, and they are very confident in their quality. And after trying their products, I can feel the exact same way about it. But the great thing is that it doesn't come with the big price tag. For the first time in years, I'm treating myself to jewelry that is high quality, great for the environment, and it looks good. They have stuff that is everything from daily wear to stuff you could wear to a wedding or a big event. And for me, that's the perfect fit with jewelry. So if you have been like me and you haven't really been splurging on anything because you're hustling in your business too, but you really want to give yourself maybe a little bit of love through the form of jewelry, something that's affordable, good for the environment, and is going to last a long time, head on over to analuisa.com/MBOM. It's ANALUISA.com/MBOM, and they've got a little discount for you over there. And as always, thank you so much to the sponsors of this episode for supporting the show, and I hope that you guys can go support them in return. All right, now on to today's episode of the podcast. I'm very excited to be joined by Jeremy Pollack, who is a psychologist, an anthropologist, as well as a leading expert in conflict resolution. And in Jeremy's business, he deals with all types of conflict. He helps individuals as well as groups navigate both intrapersonal and interpersonal conflicts. And he has a background in evolutionary psychology research and applied coaching. And honestly, Jeremy has the type of background and knowledge where I could have just sat and picked his brain pretty much all day about this type of stuff. I'm really passionate on being a great leader, having great communication. And I think that this is particularly important when it comes to the yoga industry, because most of the time the relationship between yoga teachers and studio owners is a contractor role. So we often don't have systems in place for dealing with conflicts. Yet yoga studios are certainly not an environment that is exempt from having conflicts. We certainly have conflicts come up between classes and payment and all that type of thing, and we need to know how to deal with them positively. So on this episode, Jeremy and I talk about how to deal with conflicts, how to be a great leader, tips for communicating positively, how to resolve the conflicts that you might have with somebody in the workplace, as well as so much more. So I hope that you enjoy this episode, and here's Jeremy. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast today. I'm super excited to be chatting with you.
Thanks, Amanda. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. And when I was looking at all the things that you do, I was like, man, you're like conflict resolution, you're a coach, you've got this whole spiritual side, you've got martial arts, you've got mediator. It's so much different stuff. So my first question for you is, can you tell me a bit about yourself, your background, and a little bit about all the things that you do?
Yeah, I kind of have my toe in a lot of different, a lot of different areas. I come, I come from a martial arts background, so the way I got started in this whole arena of, I guess, psychology as a general field is I was a martial arts instructor for a long time, and then I owned a martial arts school, so I became sort of organically a teacher and a coach on that level, and then I started studying. I started getting into men's coaching and started studying coaching, and some of my students asked me to coach them, and so then I began a coaching business, and I started coaching, and it was working well in terms of the personal development coaching. I also, at the same time, was studying Taoism and some Buddhism, and got into Taoist studies pretty seriously for a while, and meditation and that kind of thing. And then, and eventually I got very interested in academic aspect of psychology. So I went back to school for evolutionary psychology, which is a subset of evolutionary anthropology, which is what I got my master's in. And then I got a master's in conflict resolution and negotiation. Now I'm getting my doctorate in psychology. And for the last several years, I started a conflict resolution consulting firm. And so I go around the country and help businesses and sometimes even families and couples work out conflicts, interpersonal conflicts. And so that's my stuff in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah,
I still
wow.
teach martial arts and things too.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so has your path really just been like, oh, I'm kind of interested in this thing, I'm going to learn more about it. And then if you continue feeling interested, you kind of like find an avenue of entrepreneurship where you can help people with that? Or how did you get like,
Yeah,
where do your interests come with all this stuff?
yeah. I mean, you know, I am generally interested in the psychology of conflict and cooperation, and I love to study it. I do a lot of volunteer work around it, and I mean, just in terms of research, I work as a researcher at Stanford, and I don't get paid for that. I just work at a lab there, and we do research, and so I just love to study it, love to learn about it, and my history as an entrepreneur, I have worked for myself for, I don't know, since I was, I don't know, 25. And I've always sort of taken what I love to do and try to figure out a way to offer it in a way that creates value for people so that I can then also make a living doing what I actually like to do. And sometimes it works well and sometimes it hasn't worked well, but for the most part, it's worked out pretty well. I had turned martial arts, which was a passion of mine, into a business, and then sold that business and became a coach, and then now a conflict consultant. So yeah, I think your audience, especially as yoga studio instructors, I actually work with some yoga studio instructors, and a lot of them don't have, kind of like me. They don't have a experience or training in how to be entrepreneurs, and they're just sort of learning on the fly, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I think it's great to take a passion and figure out how to offer it in a way that creates value and something that's probably unique in the industry if you can, and make a living at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just love that whole, like, feel like I identify as like a person who's very multi-passionate and also just like a lifelong learner. And I feel like, seeing that within what you've done is really, really cool and inspiring to me. So that's awesome. One of the things I want to dive into is the conflict resolution side of things, because I feel like in the yoga space, there's definitely conflict. There's definitely conflict resolution needed. And I think that because yoga teachers often come from this like yogic sort of spiritual side, it's sort of this idea of like, oh, we need to deal with everything like very peacefully, which amazing. I'm all for that. But I think sometimes it can kind of end up being like a little bit passive or just not dealing with things. So I guess my first question around conflict resolution for you is kind of like, one, do you see conflict in like every industry? Like, is it just kind of the nature of humans to have conflict, or is there a way to like avoid conflict altogether?
So conflict is totally normal and natural. It happens in every single industry and every single business. It happens in pretty much every single cooperative venture between human beings. So whether it's a workplace or any kind of group, or anytime you're going to get more than a few people together to try to cooperate in some way or coordinate their efforts in some way, there's going to be conflict. The problem with conflict is not that there's conflict. Because conflict a lot of times can be it can be a very good force for innovation. That's the way that, friction creates movement and energy and rebirth of things and new thoughts. So conflict can be a good thing as long as it's managed properly. That's the big issue, which people don't know, and a lot of people, you need to get trained in how to understand to deal with conflict. A lot of times, some people are naturally good at it, but most people are not naturally good at dealing with conflict. And you're right, yoga teachers and sort of gym owners and that kind of thing in general. Well, gym owners less so, but the yoga teachers, meditation instructors, that kind of thing. They are typically they want to be as peaceful as possible, and so I think that their tendency, at least from what I've seen, and I have relatively limited experience, but I have some experience dealing with yoga teachers, instructors, and owners. That they do kind of avoid it, and they bury their head in the sand a little bit about it, and that's not a good strategy for conflict. You do want to confront it, but in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when the training comes in.
Yeah, for sure.
So how to do that.
In terms of, and obviously taking a training, I think is probably like the best way to learn more about conflict resolution. But do you have any kind of like top tips for how to, I guess, start dealing with conflict in the workplace, and specifically like kind of in a yoga space?
Yeah, well, I'll say I'll start at the general level in any team environment, including a workspace. The leadership, it really trickles down. Conflict trickles down, and when there's conflict between employees, leadership has the ability to usually mediate it, and if not, then they could hire someone to help if they need some help or that kind of thing. But a lot of times, the buck stops at the leader. And so I would suggest anyone that owns a studio, anyone that leads a team, manages a team, that they have at least some basic leadership training, because that is really important. If without basic leadership training or understanding of how to lead teams properly, that is just a catalyst for conflict. So you need to understand how to support your team, how to support your instructors, how to let them feel both autonomous and supported in different ways. And there's different ways of leading different types of people. But so like allowing them to, if you have a bunch of teachers, allowing them to, on one level, feel that they're supported in dealing with customer service issues, feel that they have some autonomy in the way that they lead their instruction in their classes, that you allow them to have a sense of identity in and ownership over what they do for your team at the studio, while at the same time figuring out how to also keep them contained within the structure of your organization. So there's different elements, and I think leadership training, basically, even just like an online course or read a book or something, would be really helpful for studio owners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great tip, and because I think based on all my work experience, I feel like I can identify people who have either trained in leadership or have more of a natural tendency towards leading well. And then I can identify, a number of other people who are in maybe a management or a power role where I feel like they didn't lead very well. And it does make a massive difference. Like I can think about my own personal happiness and fulfillment in those jobs being led by somebody who wasn't a very strong leader.
Yeah. And a major part of leadership training is communication. How do these people communicate? Mm-hmm. And they might be good at their job, for instance, but they don't know how to communicate well with their team. And that is a big problem. And that can create a lot of resentment and hurt and pain, which turns into anger and et cetera. So leadership training and communication skills training, those are two big elements of how to. Yoga teachers a lot of times are pretty good communicators, but sometimes in a leadership capacity, sometimes they need a little help. Mm-hmm. That's in my experience.
Yeah. Do you have any
Yeah.
resources for leadership or communication, like ones that you found really helpful that you recommend to your clients?
So what we provide a lot of coaching, leadership coaching. So if you're not going to do coaching, which is a little bit, more in depth and expensive, if you don't want to do that, then, any good book on leadership training. I don't have any lay books. I read a lot of academic books, and I don't know how helpful that would be, but any good book on Amazon about leadership training, I actually just recommended a couple, but I don't have them in front of me. Would be good. Anything on communication training, basic communication. There's so many books out there on it, and I think anything would help. Even just YouTube videos. There's some good videos online. Unfortunately, I wish I had something more specific to recommend, but I don't off the top of my head.
No, that's okay. One of the
Yeah,
best communication books I've ever read is Nonviolent Communication by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. Have you read that before?
I know a lot about nonviolent communication. Yeah, I mean, so Marshall Rosenberg's, he has a very it's a great place to start, and he has got a great angle on what is sort of integrative or transformative communication styles that came before him. What he did is not like necessarily super new, but he did it in a unique way.
Mm-hmm.
And he communicated the style of communication, which is basically like, 3-part assertion message communication, very simple communication, and understanding what people are going through underneath the surface and that kind of thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he's got good stuff. If you could study nonviolent communication, it's very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I like just the philosophy of like seeing and hearing people. Like I felt like it was really eye-opening for
Mm-hmm.
me because it was very different from like how I grew up, which I think for a lot of people it's like however your parents kind of like communicated and dealt with conflict is sort of
Yeah.
how you
Yeah.
end up taking it into spaces. And I was recognizing as an adult that like I hadn't really been taught how to my communication was fine, but it was my communication of situations that were frustrating me. Like it's like I almost couldn't communicate it in a way that
Right.
people were understanding, like, oh, she's upset until I was like crying or yelling. And then they're like, oh, whoa, she's upset.
Yeah, I
So,
think that's really normal. I mean, most people don't have communication training, so when you're growing up and your parents don't teach you, which most parents don't, that's just the case. It really does take some learning to understand how to communicate properly, especially when you're heated or when your emotions are high. It's very difficult.
yeah,
Very
absolutely.
difficult to, yeah.
So if you're in a workplace, say you're working at a yoga studio and the studio owner doesn't have the best like conflict resolution or communication, are there things you can do kind of at your level to make sure that like you're still dealing with the conflict that's around you or dealing with any conflict that comes across you in a positive way?
Do you mean when I'm working? Is that
Like, is
like when
say,
I'm hired as a consultant?
I mean more like in the situation of like, if there's a yoga teacher out there who's working for a studio and they're like, okay, great. Well, my studio owner is clearly not like communicating very
Hmm.
well. Like, what are some things that
Yeah.
they can do at their level?
It's a little difficult to give a gist of it just in a general way because there's so many different types of communication styles. But I think one thing is not to avoid it and not to let it fester so that it starts building something in you. If you need to talk to your boss, for instance, and they're not communicating very well, it would be really helpful to, I thought about how conflict resolution, just as a practice in normal life and yoga, correlate. And one way that they really correlate is, yoga is a practice of, or at least the core of yoga is a practice. And Amanda, you can correct me because I'm not a yoga instructor, but of allowing your ego to subside and sort of transcending your ego for a moment and being very present in your body and getting out of ego mind and into sort of witness mind or like a higher path. And that's the same thing when you're in a conflict resolution setting. You really want to try to let go of your ego and transcend it. And it sounds kind of hokey, but the idea is basically, how do I communicate with this person without being defensive, essentially? And the way that I can do that is by stepping outside myself and allowing this person a safe space to talk and give her truth without me taking it personally or without me internalizing what she's saying and making it about me and recognizing this person's this person is communicating her truth. It has nothing, even if the person's trying to make it about me, it's not really about me. It's what's going on for them. And so I don't need to internalize this. I could be here and create a safe space for them to communicate and just listen and hear what they're going through and try to relate to them on an emotional level. And so if you can do that, let's say you're having trouble communicating with your boss, and you can go to her and say, or him and say, I noticed when you say this is happening, et cetera, and you say this, or you communicate this way, and I'd really like to talk to you about it. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're needing from me, or what's going on for you? And just doing it in a calm way where you're giving them a chance to talk, and then you just listen and see if you can hear underneath what they're saying. And just to start to understand where they're coming from in their perspective. It sounds a little abstract, and because it's hard to place an exact instruction without knowing a particular situation.
Totally.
But the best thing is to just to talk about it, not to let it fester, and to do it in a very calm way where you can sort of put your ego aside and just listen and give them a safe space to talk.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's helpful or not.
No, it absolutely is. And I totally understand that it's like you can't walk through an exact situation because it's going to look so differently depending on like what the conflict is. It's really interesting. I worked for kind of right around the time I transitioned from working in corporate into heading down my path with becoming a yoga teacher and running a yoga business and stuff. And in that time I worked for Lululemon, and Lululemon actually has like really good policies around this. They have if something's bothering you or somebody said something that upset you, they have a policy where you bring it up in the moment. So I think for me, I found it quite challenging because, like I said, at that point I was doing a lot of personal growth, and I was recognizing like, oh, my conflict resolution skills are not very strong. My communication's not that great with this stuff. And I was recognizing that I wasn't always identifying what the feelings were in the moment. And it would be like much later that I'd be like, oh, I'm like upset about this thing. And then, it was totally fine with our policies to bring it up later. You just had to give context for the situation. And I really liked because it was like, we were all trained on this is the expectation. Like you're going to sit there and you're going to listen when somebody says something, and then it'll be your turn to speak. It was such a good way to kind of relieve anything big happening. But I guess my question is like, have you ever experienced situations where, maybe that's not the policy in the workplace, and you go to bring something up with somebody and they're just either 1, they won't make time to talk to you, or 2, they're non-responsive, or 3, they're very like, it's okay, it's totally fine, nothing's wrong. Like any type of those sort of like shutdown things where you're like, there is something wrong. Like, let's just like get it out in the air instead of letting it fester. And they're like, it's fine, I'm okay.
Yeah, all three. All three are very normal. I haven't actually worked in a workplace for someone else in some time, but because I work as a consultant in workplaces, I see this all the time. And these are major complaints of employees when I go to talk to them. When I do assessments in organizations, is that leadership a lot of times they either don't make the time because they just don't want to deal with it, or they pretend everything's fine, and or they communicate in a way that's not safe. So like if you bring it up, then they're going to retaliate or be defensive or something. So it's just not safe to even bring it up at all. And so what happens is there's a lack of communication, there's a lack of transparency, and the culture starts to erode. And then it gets to a point where they can't ignore it and they have to do something about it. And that's when they call in like someone like myself or whoever. And a lot of times it's very late in the process. They should have headed it off early on. So yeah, it's communication is huge. And I do like the idea of bringing it up in the moment. However, a lot of times you're right. It's really hard to bring it up in the moment. It's really hard to know what's going on. You might be feeling something and you could even call that out, and you could even to yourself and say, well, I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling really frustrated right now. Just know that. That's all you need to know. And then you can kind of think about it for, a few hours or a day or something and go, what is it that feels, frustrating or making me angry or something like that. And then once you're kind of more clear on it and you're in a calmer space, not so emotional, and you go back and you can confront it in a calm way. So, bringing something up in the moment, I think, is very difficult actually. Unless you're very good at staying calm.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if it's something like small where it's like, hey, when you said that this way, like it just didn't sit very well with me. Like next time, maybe say it a little differently. But
exactly.
yeah, I've always found it's like, even now, like I'm much more practiced at it, and, practice yoga regularly. I meditate lots, I journal lots, and it's still quite hard for me to like put my finger on things. Like sometimes my partner will be like, okay, something's off. And I'm like, I'm feeling frustrated, but I don't really know what it is.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, just let me know when you know. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, no, and that's a good policy. It's like, yeah, exactly. Like you just call out, this is how I'm feeling. I don't know what it's about yet, but this is how I'm feeling. And even if they, okay, well, let's talk about it. No, I'm not ready to talk about this yet. I just need a little time. And that should be okay. That should be fine, and then when you're ready, you can talk about it.
Yeah. Cause I think the hard thing in like, outside the workplace, like with, romantic partnerships or roommates or best friends or family, is that, sometimes those emotions come out on those people, and then they're confused because they're like, is this about me? What did I do?
Yeah, they internalize it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it takes kind of like a lot of self-awareness to be like, oh, I'm feeling this thing, but it has nothing to do with you.
It really does. And it takes a lot of self-awareness on both parts. Especially the person listening. So there's one end, which is the person that has the problem, that's coming to communicate that problem in a respectful, safe, but authentic way. And then there's the person on the receiving end who's hearing that this person has a conflict with them or with something they did. And so how do you deal with both of those things? And for both of them to go, this isn't necessary. I'm not going to make this about me or about, so the person having the conflict, I'm not going to make this about them. This is what's going on for me. And so maybe they can fix it in some way, and vice versa on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Hey yogis, I just wanted to take a quick little break to talk about studio growth. Has your yoga studio's growth become stagnant? If you're like many studio owners I talk to, you've tried every marketing tactic under the sun. You started a blog, you're posting regularly on all the social media sites, running challenges, sending out newsletters, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, you're doing a ton of work and barely paying the bills. What if there was an easier way? A way to get new students regularly coming through the door without having to do so much work to get them there. A proven system that will consistently bring in 20 plus new paying students to your studio each and every month. Well, there is. Ron Medlin and his team at GetYogaStudents.com have developed a 3-step system that will help you quickly grow your yoga studio to a 6-figure profits and beyond without being shackled to your business. So if you're ready to grow fast and you'd like the blueprint to help you get started, visit GetYogaStudents.com today to get the exact system Ron and his team uses to help his yoga studio clients add 10, 20, or even 30 new students every single month. On top of that, you get a free 45-minute consultation session. So if you're kind of like, I'm not really too sure about all this, I don't want to fork out a bunch of money without even knowing if this is going to work, head on over to GetYogaStudents.com, book a free consultation, and just talk with Ron. He's got so much knowledge, and him and his team are willing to work with you with your studio's needs. And once again, it's GetYogaStudents.com to start getting more students in your yoga studio. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you in part by Offering Tree. Most wellness professionals struggle with creating a website and a digital presence. So Offering Tree created easy-to-use software that guides yoga teachers through the process in about 30 minutes. That's right. You can have a beautiful mobile responsive website in 30 minutes. Offering Tree's website tools allow teachers to put their class schedules on their own branded website and allows their students to book classes and even pay online. It also supports one-on-one appointment booking. Your Offering Tree website will have a whole host of other tools to help you be a successful teacher, like newsletter and a blog, website traffic analytics, search engine optimization, client communication tools, and more. Offering Tree really does make it simple to have a website and takes care of the tech side of teaching. So if you've been putting off creating a website because you think it will be a headache, you should really give them a try. To get started on your website, go to offeringtree.com/MBOM and receive 50% off your first 3 months. One of the things that I really loved about Offering Tree when I first signed up was how pleasantly surprised I was at really how easy it was. I've been using WordPress for years and I'm a big fan of WordPress. And I always say that once you get over that hump of understanding any type of software or technology, it becomes really easy. With Offering Tree, there is no hump to get over. It's just very, very simple. I had a website that looked really professional in less than 30 minutes. Again, check out offeringtree.com/MBOM to receive 50% off your first 3 months and create your new website today. All right, back to the podcast episode.
One little acronym that I like to use, which is like a short technique, especially when you're hearing a conflict, when someone brings you a conflict they have with you or something you did. I use the acronym LEAF: listen, empathize, apologize, fix.
Okay.
And that seems to be pretty helpful, a pretty quick one. If you practice it, it gets to be very quick. And basically it's just, listening. In other words, creating a very safe, open space for them to talk without you talking or waiting for your time to defend yourself or like justify your position or something. Just listen to what they're saying. Try to empathize with them. Try to put yourself in their shoes. Even if you don't agree with what they're saying or you don't agree with their position or their perspective, try to empathize. In other words, try to figure out why might they be feeling like this. If I were them, would I be feeling like this? Like, how does it feel to feel like that? And then a lot of times apologies go a long way. Even if you didn't mean to do something, even if you're not agreeing with their perspective, I don't think apologizing is a way of agreeing with someone. I think apologizing is just a way of saying, hey, your feelings matter to me and I'm sorry,
Yeah, that's an important one because I think so many people are like, I'm not going to apologize. Like, it wasn't my fault or I didn't do anything wrong or like they're just as wrong as I am. They get kind of like their back up about something, but it's like, apologizing doesn't have to be about, I don't know, agreeing.
It doesn't have to be, agreeing. Yeah.
About like who's right or wrong.
It's not an admission of guilt. No, I don't think apology does not have to be an admission of guilt. And people get very, they get stuck in their own. If I apologize, then I did something wrong. And I think it also it's a matter of what the motive is. If your motive or if your intention is to resolve the conflict and get back to peace, then apologizing shouldn't be a big deal. If you want to stay in the conflict and you want to stay in the problem, okay, fine, don't apologize. But if you want to get back to peace, apologizing may be important, even though you're not admitting that you did something wrong. You're just basically what you're saying is. And this is an important distinction. Like a lot of times people apologize and they go, "I'm sorry you feel that way."
Yeah.
Or, something like that. And that's very that's very condescending. And you don't want to apologize for how someone feels, but rather I would say, "I'm sorry I came off that way. I didn't realize that." Like I'm not make it about me, not them. Like, wow, I'm sorry I said that. I didn't realize that. That was how it was taken, and I really apologize. Like something like that, where you're apologizing for your action rather than apologizing for how someone feels or how someone saw something.
Yeah. My biggest pet peeve with apologies is like I'm sorry you feel that way. Like,
it's so condescending. Right? Yeah, that's not. Yeah, it's like I do know here. And then the last part of that is fix. So what can I do differently next time? How can I fix this? What do you need from me to go forward? So I that's a huge part of also conflict resolution is after you listen, you validate what they're saying and how they're feeling, and you apologize for anything that you allow yourself to apologize for. Then you ask, what do you need from me? How can I fix this? Or what can I do differently in the future? Or you offer a suggestion. Here, what if I do this in the future? So you fix it so that you can move forward. Because otherwise it's just like, there's no promise this isn't going to happen again.
Right. So coming up with a solution, is that like something that's often better done with like somebody mediating? Like say it was 2 yoga teachers at a studio, like should the studio owner be there, or is that really kind of up to the people who are having that conversation?
It totally depends. It's always great to do it between 2 people. If they have the skills to do it, if they're able to do it, that's great. If they can't seem to figure it out, then having someone to mediate it would be good as well. And I would say for studio owners who want to mediate conflicts between employees, the best thing to do would be there's a debate. I've read some stuff about like don't talk to them individually, just have them come in together, and you don't want to take sides and this kind of stuff. I adamantly disagree with that. You want to talk to each person individually so that they get a chance to tell you their whole story. And if you're going to mediate as an owner, you've got to take the stance, and this is tough for owners, but they've got to take the stance of a neutral. So you've got to take yourself out of the situation and create a safe, sort of neutral space for both people to tell you their side of the story, even though you as an owner might have an agenda. If you want to properly mediate. So you hear both sides, very independently as you can, as neutrally as you can. And then you decide, okay, you can start deciding what is a good way, what are some interesting solutions that you can come up with as an owner without them to propose. And then you can get them together, the two of them, and you can tell them both, okay, here's what I heard, in a diplomatic way, here's what I heard from each of you. Let's talk about some solutions. Here's some that I have come up with, or what do you guys think? Let's brainstorm a little bit, and that's a good way to mediate it. And, worst comes to worst, if you can't, then you have someone else come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. That sounds good. If there's a conflict that's happening between like an employee and a manager, so say it's like a teacher and a studio owner, and maybe the studio owner is not super trained in this type of stuff, is there a way to kind of like, I don't know, create the space so that there's like takes away the power dynamic? Because I feel like there's like, when somebody's in the position of being able to like fire you, I feel like there's a lot more incentive to not bring these things up that are bothering you, yet that's when they like fester and they build up, and then all of a sudden you're like, I can't do this anymore, like I quit, and they're like, wait, what? Or something of that
so
sort.
You're saying, so the question is, on the part of the employee, how do you bring it up? Is that or is it on the part of okay, so on the part of the employee, one thing that I recommend a lot of times is, especially if you're in a situation where there's a power dynamic at a place, take yourself out of the place. So ask and try to get back to a human level, so you kind of equalize things. So if for instance, if you need to talk to your studio owner and it's serious, I mean, if it's a little thing, you can just talk to them. But if it's a serious thing and you have to have a real conversation, you might ask them to coffee, or ask them to go get a bite to eat, or just ask them to take a walk or something like that outside of the studio where the power dynamic exists. And sometimes that can equalize things a little bit and give people a sense of being human again, and not, boss and employee. And then from there, telling someone what you witness and how it makes you feel, and then asking them, for their experience. And again, there's a practice of self-mediation, of also you mediating your own conflict by being the neutral. So again, that takes a little bit of ego transcendence, of getting out of your own self and going, I'm going to tell this person what's going on for me and my experience, and then I'm going to ask them what their experience is, and listen without ego, listen without internalizing it, and let them talk and give me their truth. And then from there, try to be a neutral, independent force for solution. Like, I hear you, and you heard me, and let's brainstorm. Let's figure out how we can get past this,
Yeah, I feel like the key takeaway from that for me is being able to ask them what their perspective was. Like, I feel like that's so key, because I feel like it's so often like we experience situations totally different with other people. And so it's like maybe they weren't aware of what they said, or maybe there was a reason that they said something the way they said, and they're like, oh, this is, how I saw the situation. And you're like, oh, wow, that's like so different from how I saw it. And then you can understand a little bit more like where each other is coming from.
So important. Because a lot of times, most of these conflicts I deal with are between employees and managers, or employees and owners. And it's super important for that space to be created, where everyone gets to hear the other, everyone gets to give their perspective. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, when I talk to let's say employees, they just believe that because of the power dynamic, they just believe that, the owner did this and said this, and that's what they meant. And I have rights because I'm an employee, and they have to bend to my will. Otherwise they're doing something wrong, etc. And if they want to really get out of the conflict, it's important for them to go, here's how I see it. Here's how I felt it. This is what happened in my experience. I'm interested to hear what their experience is. Because you're right. It's complete. There's one thing that happened and two completely different interpretations of what happened. Or there's one dynamic that's happening, one energy in the office, and there's two completely different interpretations of that energy, of that that event.
Mm-hmm.
So
Just
yeah,
with
it's so important.
Yeah, for sure. With my own just personal work with, I guess, conflict resolution and communication, that was like one of the biggest things that was really eye-opening, especially like with my partner. Like we both have done some training and some reading around MVC, and it'd be so weird when we'd be reflecting to each other, like, okay, we're in a disagreement. Like, what was the situation like for you? Like, how do you feel? It'd be like, wait, like that's how
Yeah.
you perceived this thing? Like, what?
Yeah.
Be like,
And to believe it,
so
right?
yeah,
And to
so
listen to them and believe them.
yeah. But yeah, it's like, it's such a game changer to be able to identify that with other people and then hear them, like not bringing them down in a way where you're like, oh, well, that's silly. That's not what happened. It's like you're actually hearing what they're saying and recognizing like their side of it as a truth too.
Yeah. So you are in that situation, you're really empathizing with them because you're not listening to them and then going, that's not true. That didn't happen. Or, here's why that's incorrect. You're not doing that. What you're doing is, whoa, you're staying curious. You're staying open. You're saying, wow, that's how you saw it. I had no idea. That's, and then from there, that's a great space to work from, to start figuring out, okay, you saw it this way. I'd had no idea you saw it that way. You felt that way about it. My gosh, here's how I felt about it. Let's figure out how to fix this going forward,
Yeah, absolutely. So I
Yeah.
feel like a big piece of this has been awareness and consciousness and being really present with yourself and with other people. And I think, lots of yoga teachers have mindfulness practices. But I'm curious, do you have any ways that you either recommend or that you do personally with conflict resolution just to be like more, I guess, like conscious of the way you're feeling and kind of aware of the people around you?
Well, I personally meditate daily, and I think meditation is a key component of staying self-aware. But for people that I work with who are not necessarily meditators, I usually, when I start coaching individuals at work for conflict purposes, I usually have them do a little bit of journaling, and I start even like on a daily, even just for like a week on a daily basis, and going like, at the end of each day, do a little recap of how you're feeling. Journal about what went on for you today. And that journaling starts to get them into a space of being more self-aware. And then throughout the day, they start self-reflecting more, and they start going, okay, I'm going to put that in my journal later, and that kind of thing. So that helps. And it also seems to help, that self-awareness help keep them accountable for their own actions. So when they're more aware of how they're acting and behaving and feeling, et cetera, they can, I think they're more motivated to not write down, negative or destructive or dismissive behaviors in their journal later. So they start acting a little better, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But journaling is one thing that I think is helpful, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's been the one that's been like most helpful for me as well. Like journaling, meditating, just yoga in general, I feel like brings me kind of like more present with myself.
Absolutely.
If I'm ever like, I don't know, having one of those experiences where I'm just like kind of a walking body and I'm not really aware of like anything I'm feeling, like physically, mentally, emotionally, I feel like yoga really brings me in. But yeah, meditation helps me a lot if I'm like, I don't know, those times where you just like feel like your brain is like a whirlpool of emotions and you just need it to like calm down a little bit so you can actually understand it. I feel like it's those times meditation's really great.
Yeah. I mean, exercise in general is really important. I find that people who are not exercising, don't have a good work-life balance, who are not getting enough of like sort of me time outside of work and doing things that are healthy for themselves, that's another setting for conflict, because it's correlated with sort of life dissatisfaction. And if you're not satisfied with your own life, you're going to find conflicts a lot more easily than if you are. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was a little bit similar to, I guess, my experience when I worked in corporate. Like I was working a job that on paper was really great, but it wasn't fulfilling me, and I knew it wasn't. But
yeah,
I was in a position where like I needed to keep working it for financial reasons, and I was also new in my career, and I was kind of battling this like, I should like this. This is great. I'm so lucky to have this job. And then I'd turn around and be like, but I don't like it type thing. So then I used my social life as a way to make myself feel better which meant that I never had any time to actually like sit in contemplation with myself. And then it'd be like times where I don't know, go out with friends, drink too much alcohol. And then it's like 2 a.m. and I'm crying because I haven't dealt with like anything that's going on inside my mind.
Yeah. I mean, every piece of good peace building literature you'll read, basically has the, argues that peace starts within. Peace starts within the person. So if you're not at peace with yourself, it's very difficult to create peace outside yourself. And if you feel yourself getting in a lot of conflicts with people, it's probably because you're in conflict with yourself. So getting yourself right, getting to a place of peace, super important. Meditation, yoga, exercise, healthy eating, all that stuff, super important. Good sleep.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I found a huge difference when I made big changes in my life, like changed my career, started practicing yoga more, was back at the gym in like a more regular way, was going out less, planned time for myself, like just sitting in the bath and just like being peaceful. It's like amazing what that'll do for your mental space. And then, when you do feel like stuff is building up, it's not just like exploding out of you when, I don't know, whenever it needs to come out. Because I do think we have like only so much capacity to handle all of this stuff. And obviously it's different for everyone. But I feel like just dealing with it more like in the moment as opposed to like pushing it away is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's crazy. I saw some statistic that was like, 13% of people in America are happy with their jobs, and 60 something percent were just, kind of didn't care about their jobs, didn't hate them, didn't like them, just whatever, tolerating it. And then something like 25% just hate their jobs. And we're working increasingly more hours in America. And so think about people, a quarter of the people hate what they do most of the time. It's like, that's just a setup for, how can they not be in conflict? They're not happy with what they're doing every day. So I would say, that's another huge aspect is if you're not happy in your job, maybe there's a way to get happy in your job. A lot of times it has to do with feeling a sense of identity and control in your workplace, a sense of competence, a sense of feeling, autonomous or connected with other people. There's some basic psychological needs that need to be fulfilled in a workplace. But if you just can't, if it's just not the right place for you, really, why keep doing it? There's got to be other ways for you to make money. It's unfortunate when I see people that they're just so unhappy in their jobs and they just can't seem to figure out how to get happy.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my experience. And I was like 22, fresh out of university. I just got back from like traveling around the world for 6 months. So I'd been on this like crazy high of experiencing the world and all of its beauty. And then I came back to this job that I just didn't love. And I remember like my boyfriend was kind of in the same situation too. So it wasn't even like one of us could pull each other up. Like we were both kind of like, is this it? Like, are we going to do this till we're 65? And I was just like, there has to be more to life than this. Like there has to be.
It's very interesting what's happening right now, and with millennials especially, or not even millennials, but like Gen X and lower, is people are really valuing their time more than they used to. It used to be like, hey, you get a job and you stay in it for 40 years and that's a good life. And that really was a way that people felt satisfied, but it's not enough anymore. For whatever reason, the culture has changed, the mindset has changed. It's just not enough to have a secure job. It's got to be something that we feel is meaningful and where we have, close connections with other people. And that's really important. So got to fulfill those needs if you want to stay at a place of peace within yourself and therefore a place of peace with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was actually just talking about this with a friend the other day, kind of talking about how blessed and privileged we are to be able to like make these choices for ourselves. And I've thought a lot about like, what the difference is between like, what my parents did versus like what I'm doing and then what my grandparents did. And I think I know for like my own parents, like my dad was the youngest of 5. They didn't have like enough money to feed 5 kids properly. So he never really like had enough to eat. And then for him, it's like he got into the workplace and like built a business up from the ground, and he worked like pretty much my entire life. So I was always like, I would have rather had more time with him connecting than him working so hard to make all this money. But he valued making money because it's something he didn't grow up with. So his thing was like,
that's right.
I'm going to give my child something that I didn't have. So then I grew up without lack. So then for me, I don't have the mindset of like, I need to be in a job because it's my only option. Like I'm educated, I have skills. So I look at it, I'm like, no, I could get a job that I value on a different level other than finances more. And I think, that's not the case for everyone. Certainly not in the world, but definitely not in like even Canada and the US. So it definitely is like coming from a place of privilege. But I know lots of people who are in the same boat as me who are like, oh yeah, I have the ability to make this decision and to choose something that is that I like more. And then I see like I have cousins who have kids that are teenagers now, and they're even more so than like my generation of like having this.
I mean,
it's great.
I haven't read anything about this, but just listening to what you just said from an anecdotal perspective, it just dawns on me that, our parents, let's say the baby boomers, grew up in an era where their parents potentially struggled with money because of the Depression era. And so what they didn't have was that security. And so the thing that really made them feel secure, like fulfilled, was having a sense of security. And so baby boomers got into jobs where they just felt secured. Didn't matter whether they liked it or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then our generation, we witnessed them feeling very secure. So that wasn't the thing that triggered it. But what we did notice is them being in jobs that they didn't necessarily love, and a sense of lack of fulfillment potentially in what they were doing every day. And so that's the thing now that we grew up with needing, because we saw our parents not having that, just the same way they saw their parents not having money. And that's the thing they needed.
Yeah.
So now we don't. So the money thing is,
it'll be interesting to see if it comes like full circle, where there's a point where like I don't know if it's like when I have children and they grow up and they're like, man, my parents like, I don't know, could have had more stable jobs and made more money or something. It'll happen the generation after that. I don't really know.
Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. Maybe it'll happen in our lifetimes. Who knows?
That would be crazy if that happens.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah,
there's a loose theory that we're coming up with right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so much in it though. For people who are kind of interested in learning more about this, maybe taking a training with you or working with you or hiring you to come to their business, their yoga studio, where can they go to find more information on all that?
Oh yeah, so my company is called Pollack Peace Building. So if they can just search for that, or they can go to pollackpeacebuilding.com.
Cool. Yeah, I was looking at your website. It looks like you've got tons of training. Do you do training just in your area, or?
We do them all over the country. So I have actually consultants all over the country, in different locations, mostly in big cities, that work with companies, get placed at companies, and we do training all over.
Okay, awesome. That's great. Cool. It looks like you've got an online certification as well.
Yeah, we're revamping that, so it's not quite active at the moment, but it should be soon.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll put links for all of that in the show notes so that people can access that and know where to find you and all that good stuff. I really appreciate this conversation. This is kind of unique to what I usually do. It's usually like yoga teachers coming on the podcast, but this is a topic that has been really like profound in my own life and something that I'm really passionate about within the places that I do work in. Like, I feel like I'm quite choosy with the people that I do work with and making sure that there is that good relationship and that we can have those conversations. So it's definitely something I'm like super passionate about. And I'm really grateful that you took the time to chat with me about this today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I know it's a little bit unique for you, but that was a very interesting conversation. I definitely love working with like yoga studio owners, gym owners, that kind of thing, because I come from that background before I got even into conflict resolution. So.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
All right. I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Jeremy. Make sure that you go check out what he has to offer, especially if you are in a studio ownership position or a leadership position, both in maybe the studios that you work at or maybe in your own business and you're leading others with your own yoga business or yoga teacher trainings or anything like that. There's so much that can be learned about conflict resolution and communication. And I know I definitely left this episode feeling so inspired to just come back to this in my own own daily practices with my own relationships and my own career. As always, you can find show notes on the website at mbomyoga.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga. You can join the private Facebook community at Yoga Business Badasses. Just search it in the search bar on Facebook and I'll let you in. And as always, you can send me questions, comments, or feedback at info@mbomyoga.com. All right, thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.